Amen. So let's go ahead and move into the book of Ecclesiastes. A couple weeks ago, we briefly went through the book of Proverbs, which was so much, and I'll give the same caveat this evening. When it comes to the book of Ecclesiastes, and honestly, every book in the Bible, what we're doing is we're doing a brief overview. So it'll be really impossible to get fully in depth. Again, I give that caveat for the book of Ecclesiastes because Ecclesiastes, like so many other books, it's just so much and it's so deep. As I read through it over and over again, there's just so much more that I feel like we need to bring out. But with that being said, and being mindful of everyone's time, I want to go ahead and get started. So we start in the book of Ecclesiastes. We understand that Solomon is also the author of the book of Ecclesiastes. And in chapter 1, at the beginning, in chapter 1, verse 1, and I'll be reading from the New King James. Perhaps the translation that you have is a bit different. But in chapter 1, verse 1, I begin reading, and it says, "The words of the preacher, the son of David, king in Jerusalem. Vanity of vanities, says the preacher. Vanity of vanities. All is vanity. What profit has a man from all his labor in which he toils under the sun? One generation passes away and another generation comes, but the earth abides forever. The sun also rises and the sun goes down and hastens back to the place where it arose. The wind goes toward the south and turns around to the north. The wind whirls around continually and comes again on its circuit. All the rivers run into the sea, yet the sea is not full. To the place from which the rivers come, they return again." Now, if you look at what Solomon is saying here, he begins and he starts by saying vanity of vanities. He starts by saying that word vanity is a word that means emptiness, almost like a uselessness. And Solomon is saying vanity of vanities. And what Solomon has done here, Solomon said, remember earlier what we said, Solomon had wealth and ability to do what most people on earth will never be able to do. Solomon was king over Jerusalem, and he had peace for years, for decades. Solomon had peace. He never had to spend money on wars, and he was able to make alliances with other kings, other nations, and Solomon was able to do basically whatever he wanted. And this is the book of Ecclesiastes is the chronicle of that. It's where Solomon chronicled, where he said, you know what? Basically, I'm gonna do what I want. Now, if you'll notice, in chapter 1, as it begins, like I said, he says vanity of vanities. And you're going to see that a lot throughout the book. And if you were to simply look at the book of Ecclesiastes from that perspective, you might think that Solomon was depressed. You might think that Solomon had something going on, which he did, but you might think that this is a book, it's almost like one of those books like, God, why did you put this in the Bible? Because it just seems like so much depression and vanity and vanity. And if you ask Solomon a question, Solomon, what do you think about getting a job? Solomon says vanity. Solomon, what do you think about getting married? Solomon says vanity. Solomon, what do you think about the little dresser in the bathroom? Solomon says vanity. And everything is vanity to Solomon. But as we go into the book, I want you to understand the way it was told to me. The book of Ecclesiastes, I don't know how many of you all have read the book of Job, but if you've read the book of Job, there's kind of a similar flow, where in the book of Job, the first several chapters of the book, you'll notice that Job is going through a lot, and Job makes a lot of assumptions, and then Job's friends come in, and they make a lot of assumptions. But as you get toward the end of the book, you realize that everybody who spoke before God was wrong. So I want to enter this with the understanding that just because you see something or just because you hear something that's written through the scriptures, you've got to get to the end of the matter. And that's the same thing that happens here in the book of Ecclesiastes. So as we go through the book, we begin in chapter 1, verse 1, and it goes through verse 11, where Solomon basically, what he's doing here is he's giving the kind of the, not necessarily the end of the movie, but he's giving almost toward the end, and this is where he picks up. He's like, everything is vain. Everything is empty. All it is just useless. So let's pick up at chapter 1, verse 12. Solomon says, "I, the preacher, was king over Israel in Jerusalem, and I set my heart to seek and search out by wisdom concerning all that is done under heaven. The burdensome task God has given to the sons of man, by which they may be exercised. So what Solomon is saying here, he says, I've set my heart to search out the task that God has given men. Ultimately, what God is saying, what Solomon is saying is, I'm trying to find the purpose of life. I'm trying to find the purpose. Why am I here? God, why have you put us here? Why have you given us this task? The task that you've given us, I'm trying to find that out. Outside of going directly to God, Solomon is saying, I'm going to figure it out for myself. And like I said, Solomon had the ability. Not only did he have riches, not only did he have time, but if you remember back in the book of Kings, God gave Solomon a measure of wisdom that nobody else on earth had. God asked Solomon what it was that he wanted. He said, I want to lead your people. I want you to give me a listening heart, a heart that hears you. And God says, I'm going to do that, but I'm going to give you something that you didn't ask for. And one of those things was great wisdom. So Solomon said, I'm going to take that wisdom and I'm going to find out, as he says in verse 13, set my heart to seek and search out wisdom concerning all that is done under heaven. This burdensome task God has given to the sons of man by which they may be exercised. So we're going to do a lot of reading tonight because I feel that it's necessary. So in verse 16, that is, I communed with my heart, saying, look, I have attained greatness and have gained more wisdom than all who were before me in Jerusalem. My heart has understood great wisdom and knowledge. So he acknowledges, my heart has understood. I've gained wisdom beyond everybody. And in verse 17, he says, and I set my heart to know wisdom and to know madness and folly. One thing that I do want to say about wisdom here is that when God gave Solomon wisdom, a lot of times we'll look at wisdom and we'll think that God just zapped Solomon with wisdom and that was it. But wisdom is something, if you look here where he says in verse 17, he says, well, back up to verse 16. He says, I have attained greatness and have gained more wisdom than all who were before me in Jerusalem. Then he goes on to say in verse 17, and I set my heart to know wisdom and to know madness and folly. So Solomon, though he was given a measure of wisdom that no one else had, Solomon also grew in wisdom. And if you remember in the book of Luke, where it talks about Jesus, the Bible says of Jesus that Jesus grew in stature and he grew in wisdom. So it's possible to be given a measure of wisdom, but also to grow in that. So that's what Solomon is seeking to do here. He's seeking to take the wisdom that he has, and he's seeking to grow in it and to learn so much more. Now, one thing that I do want to mention here, verse 17, he says at the end of verse 17, he said, verse 17, and I set my heart to know wisdom and to know madness and to know folly. What Solomon is doing here, Solomon is exploring every opportunity. Solomon is doing whatever he can. He didn't just stop at wisdom. Solomon said, I set my heart to know madness and to know folly, to know the foolish things, to know those things that we call foolishness. So Solomon is going all in. He wants the entire gamut. And then he goes on to say in verse 18, he says, for in much wisdom is much grief, and he who increases knowledge increases sorrow. Now that's a profound statement because this is coming from the wisest man who ever lived. Solomon is saying, I've set my heart to understand wisdom, but in much wisdom I found much grief. And I found that the one who increases in knowledge also increases in sorrow. Now why is it that he would say something like that? When you compare that to what he wrote in the book of Proverbs, chapter 9, the book of Proverbs says that the beginning of wisdom, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom and the knowledge of the holy. So why is it that Solomon would say so much wisdom brings grief? Why is it that Solomon would say the one who increases in knowledge increases in sorrow? You've got to understand, God gives everybody a measure. Now, God gave Solomon, he gave Solomon a degree of wisdom. Have you ever seen a child or had a child, and that child gets up in age past the infancy stage, and they get to the point that they can talk, and they get to the point that they begin to ask questions. And there's one particular question that a child will ask that kind of digs into the heart of grown folks. Anybody want to take a guess at what that question might be? Got a lot of parents in here. Why? 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 And I remember I used to hear that. I used to hear that your child is going to get to that point to where they start asking questions why. And I thought, well, I mean, when they ask why, I'm just going to answer them. And I did that. I experienced that. And kids would ask why. But Dad, why is this? And I'd be like, because of that. And it would satisfy them until a few minutes later they would come back. Dad, you said that this was because of that, but why is that? I was like, well, you know, son, it's because of this and this and this and that, and probably some things that you can't understand. You're like, oh, okay. But why is that? And eventually it gets to the point to where it starts to weigh on you. Solomon began to ask a lot of questions, and Solomon got a lot of answers. But the problem with answers is when you're operating in your human mind, the only thing answers do is bring more questions. At what point do you get to where you want to know the deep secrets of the universe and you find out something and it's like, wow, we made this discovery and everybody's rejoicing about the discovery, but years later you wonder, okay, well, why is this? Why was it like that? And then you begin to quest for more. And what you used to celebrate now becomes a burden to you. Because you're like, I've got to figure this out. I've got to figure it out. Has there ever been a song in your mind that there's this tune in your mind and you can't get rid of it, and you're like, I've got to figure this song out. And you don't stop. You're on your phone. You're supposed to be at work working, and you on your phone Googling, humming in your phone. Hey, Google. Hey, Siri. What is this song? And it weighs on you, and it weighs on you, and it weighs on you. This is what was happening with Solomon. Now, remember what I said. Solomon is giving basically a discourse of everything that he experienced. So this is the reason why at one point Solomon would say that the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. But then he would say, in much wisdom, there's much grief. So we move on to chapter 2. And in chapter 2, Solomon seeks to find a purpose through basically indulging in any pleasure that he wants. Solomon said, chapter 2, verse 1, he said, I said in my heart, come now. And he's talking to himself. He says, come now, my heart. I will test you with mirth or with happiness. Therefore, enjoy every pleasure. But surely this also was vanity. I said of laughter, it's madness. And of mirth, what does it accomplish? Listen to what Solomon did. Verse 3, I search in my heart how to gratify my flesh with wine, while guarding my heart with wisdom. So Solomon had the best of wines. Now, a lot of people will look at a life like that and be like, hey, that's the life to live. Now, Solomon didn't get drunk. If you recall back in Proverbs chapter 31, Solomon understood the power of wine. At the beginning of chapter 31, Solomon talks about wine, and he says that wine is for those who are about to die. Wine is for those who have heaviness of spirit. Wine is for those who are poor so that they can forget their poverty. So Solomon wasn't foolish in that he just began to get drunk with all types of wine. But Solomon said, I want to search everything, and I want to know where is the purpose and the fulfillment in life. So chapter 3, I searched in my heart how to gratify my flesh with wine while guarding my heart with wisdom, and how to lay hold on folly, till I might see what was good for the sons of men to do under heaven all the days of their lives. Verse 4, I made my works great. I built myself houses and planted myself vineyards. I made myself gardens and orchards. I planted all kinds of fruit trees in them. I made myself water pools from which to water the growing trees of the grove. I acquired male and female servants and had servants born in my house. Yes, I had greater possessions of herds and flocks than all who were in Jerusalem before me. I also gathered for myself silver and gold and the special treasures of kings and of the provinces. I acquired male and female singers, the delights of the sons of men, and musical instruments of all kinds. So I became great and excelled more than all who were before me in Jerusalem. Now listen to verse 10. Verse 10 says, whatever my eyes desired, I did not keep from them. If my eyes saw it and I wanted it, I had it. For my heart rejoiced in all my labor. And I did not withhold my heart from my heart any pleasure. For my heart rejoiced in all my labor, and this was my reward from all my labor. Solomon did whatever he wanted to do. Solomon had everything that a heart could desire. But what he said in verse 1, he said, after all of this, surely it was vanity. Surely it was empty. All these things, they had their reward, but Solomon experienced so many things. Now I want to stop right here and let's put ourselves in Solomon's shoes, because there are a lot of things that we look at and we say, if I could only have that, if I could only have this. Some people say, if I could only be in that relationship, or if I could only have this amount of money, then I would be okay. Here is a man, as we read through the book of Ecclesiastes, here is a man who has experienced it all. This is a man who made it clear. He said that whatever I wanted, if my eyes saw it, I had it. If my heart desired it, I had it. He said it's vanity. Now let's dissect that a little bit. Why is it that Solomon would say something like that? Simply because we all understand that when we indulge in something, it satisfies us for the moment. It does. It satisfies us, and it's like, okay, I like this. I love it. But after it's over with, the only thing that attaches us to that experience is the memory that we have. When we go to, I remember I went to an amusement park for the first time. Now, I love riding roller coasters. To this day, I love it. I remember I went to an amusement park for the first time, and it blew my mind. I was amazed that I could experience something like this. And I remember wanting to go back so bad, wanting to go back. And when I went back, it was good. But it wasn't quite the same. So I was like, okay, I know what I need to do. I need to go back again. And when I went back again, it was a little bit less thrilling. So I was like, well, I need to go to a bigger amusement park. And I need to get on the ride that's much better. And that's what we do. That's the same thing that Solomon did, and it's what we do. Because we see that thing and we say, hey, I want that thing, and if I could experience it, or I have experienced it, so I'm going to go back to it. Now, what happens when we go back to something over and over and over again is the same thing that happened with Solomon. And it's something called the law of diminishing returns. I don't know if you've ever heard that, but what it means is that when you invest in something and it produces a good return, you're like, wow, that was a good investment. So you say, well, I'm going to get a lot of this. But the problem with that is the more you put into it, chances are the less you're going to get from each return. And that's what happens here in chapter 2. That's the reason why Solomon can say, well, I did so much, I did so many things, but all of it is vanity. Now, it's not that they didn't have rewards, it's just that those rewards weren't lasting. Case in point. There have been people who you'll see somebody doing something, a profession. Now you have your life, you work the way you work and you enjoy life as you see it, but you see someone else and you look at their life and you say, that life looks beautiful. Now take the man, if it's not you, let's use an example. There's a man who has a fairly decent life. He's got a wife. Sometimes he likes her, sometimes he doesn't. Sometimes she likes him, sometimes she doesn't. It's the nature of what it is. Got a couple kids, works a decent job. But he begins to look at his supervisor. He begins to look at the guy who he works for, and he says, now he's got the life. He's got the life. He's got a wife who, she's like a supermodel, and his kids, they seem to be put together, and he's got all this money, and, he seems to not worry about anything. And he turns away from what he has to try to become something else. And eventually he learns that as he moves into that role that his supervisor is in, he begins to learn all the problems that come with it. See, the things that his supervisor had to deal with before, he didn't know about that because it was all hidden. But once the curtain is pulled back and you step into it, then you realize, okay, hey, I got more money, now I got more problems. I'm responsible for more people where before I was just responsible for me and my 3. So it's the same thing, and that's what I mean when I say the law of diminishing returns, and that's what Solomon experienced here. So in chapter 2, verse 12, he goes on and he says, then I turned myself to consider wisdom and madness and folly. For what can the man do who succeeds the king? Only what he has already done. Then I saw that wisdom excels folly as light excels darkness. The wise man's eyes are in his head, but the fool walks in darkness. Yet I myself perceive that the same event happens to them all. Verse 15, so I said in my heart, as it happens to the fool, it also happens to me. And why was I then more wise? Then I said in my heart, this is all vanity. Now, what does this mean? Solomon is, again, the wisest man who's lived. But Solomon begins to break it down, and he looks and he says, I'm looking at the wise man, and the wise man, he says his eyes are in his head. So he's got good sight. And he says the fool walks in darkness. So the fool walks around, basically he can't see. So there are many things that he does that are foolish. But Solomon makes an observation at the end. He says, everybody dies. So whether you live on this earth and you're wise, or you live on this earth and you're a fool, you're still going to die. So Solomon is saying, man, all of this is vain. I don't get it. I don't understand it. Now, no, I'm not going to spoil it for you. Let's keep going. Chapter 8, verse 18. Therefore I hated life. Verse 18, he says, then I hated all my labor in which I had toiled under the sun, because I must leave it to the man who would come after me. So Solomon is saying, I did a lot of work, but I'm going to have to leave it to somebody. Verse 19, and who knows whether he will be wise or a fool? I'm doing all of this work. I can't take anything with me, so I'm going to have to leave it to someone else. And I don't know if that person is going to be wise and continue on the things that I've done. I don't know if he's going to be a fool and squander everything that I have. Yet he will rule over all my labor in which I toiled and in which I have shown myself wise under the sun. This also is emptiness. So I've looked at happiness, I've looked at mirth, I've looked at the labors that I have under the sun. And I'm trying to find the purpose of life, really what gives me fulfillment in life. One phrase that you've heard throughout this book, if you've listened, is that Solomon says 3 words. He constantly says 3 words. He says, under the sun, under the sun, under the sun. And the reason I said earlier, if you look at this book, and if you take it for face value, if you just listen to what Solomon is saying and take it for face value, you might think that he's depressed. But this is the reason why Solomon is looking, and he's saying that everything seems to be vanity. Because though he's trying to find the purpose of life, understand he's trying to find the purpose of life under the sun. So when he says under the sun, he's seeking earthly pleasures. So for the believer who reads this book, or the newly saved person who reads this book, you might be looking and saying, okay, if this is the wisest man who's lived, how is it that he's saying that everything is vain? But understand, for the most part, he's cut God out of the equation. That's the reason why Solomon is saying, I'm going to find out. That's the reason why Solomon is not saying, I'm going to go to God to find out. I'm going to find out. And when we try to find out our purpose outside of God, when we look at things under the sun, everything becomes vain. Can you all agree with that? Indeed. So let's move to chapter 3. Chapter 3 is a commonly quoted verse, or several verses are commonly quoted, especially at a time of mourning or a time of death. Verse 1 reads, to everything there is a season, a time for every purpose under heaven, a time to be born, a time to die, a time to plant, and a time to pluck what is planted, a time to kill and a time to heal, a time to break down, a time to build up, a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to mourn and a time to dance, a time to cast away stones and a time to gather stones, a time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing, a time to gain and a time to lose, a time to keep and a time to throw away, a time to tear and a time to sow, a time to keep silence. Let that sink in for a minute. And a time to speak, a time to love, and believe it or not, a time to hate, a time of war, and a time of peace. So what Solomon does here, in these contrasts that Solomon makes, basically what he does is he encompasses every time on earth. When he says a time to be born, a time to die, he's encompassing all the years of a man's life. When he says a time to heal and a time to kill, a time to cast away stones, a time to gather stones, he is basically including every extreme in life. So everything that he does, he's including from A to Z, basically. And as we move on to verse 9, he says, what profit has the worker from that which he labors? So now Solomon is looking out, and he's focusing his attention on labor. He's focusing his attention on work. And up until now, Solomon has said that everything is vain. Verse 10, I have seen the God-given task with which the sons of men are to be occupied. He has made everything beautiful in its time. Also, he has put eternity in their hearts, except that no one can find out what the work that God does from beginning to end. So ultimately what Solomon is saying here is that no one will ever find out God's plan. God's plan is so much bigger than what any one person can find out here on earth. Verse 12, I know that nothing is better for them than to rejoice and to do good in their lives, and also that every man should eat and drink and enjoy the good of all his labor. And this is the first time that he mentions God. He says this is the gift of God. So in order to get some type of resolve and in order to get some type of understanding of the question that he's seeking, Solomon has been forced to look up to God. He says that there's no better thing than to rejoice and do good, and that every man should eat, drink, and enjoy the good of his labor. He says, I know that whatever God does, it should be forever. Nothing can be added to it and nothing taken away. That which has already been, verse 15, and what is to be has already been, and God requires an account of what is past. Now, though he has some resolve, he moves on to verse 15, and he goes to another place, and he says, moreover, I saw, again, under the sun, in the place of judgment, wickedness was there. So where justice should have been, he's saying, I see wickedness. And in the place of righteousness, iniquity is there. Solomon said, I said in my heart, God shall judge the righteous and the wicked, for there is a time there for every purpose and every work. I said in my heart, concerning the condition of the sons of men, God tests them, that they may see that they themselves are like animals. For what happens to the sons of men, here he goes again, back spiraling again. He says, what happens to the sons of men also happens to animals. One thing befalls them, as one dies, so dies the other. Surely they all have one breath. Man has no advantage over the animals, for all is vanity. All are going to one place, all are from the dust, and all are going to return to the dust. Who knows the spirit of the sons of men, which go upward and the spirit of the animal which goes down to the earth? So I perceive that nothing is better that a man should rejoice in his own works, for that is his heritage. Here again, Solomon looks and he says, we're no different than the animals, because just as they die, we're going to die. We're all going back to the dust. But he has a resolve here at verse 22. So I perceive that nothing is better that a man should what? Rejoice in his own works. Moving on to chapter 4. In chapter 4, for the next couple chapters, Solomon is teaching. He's teaching on the fact that the accumulation of power and the accumulation of wealth isn't satisfying. And I don't really want to park right here, but I do want to touch on a few scriptures here in chapter 4. Beginning at verse 1, he says, then I returned. He returned from his journey or wherever he was, and he considered oppression. He says, okay, well, let me look and see how things operate in the earth. And he says, and look, the tears of the oppressed. So those who oppress, but they have no comforter. On the side of the oppressors, there's power. So those who oppress people, they have power. But those who oppress, they have no comforter. Verse 2, therefore I praise the dead who are already dead more than the living who are still alive. So Solomon is saying there's so much oppression going on that I see here on the earth, and it's causing grief to him. It's bringing grief because he's like, those who are being oppressed, it's like, what can they do? They're living a miserable life. Solomon got to the point to where he said it's better for those who are dead than those who are alive. But he goes on to say in verse 3, yet better than both is he who never existed, who has not seen the evil work that's under the sun. I'm listening to myself teach this, and this really sounds depressing. It's just terrible. But hold on to the end. Just hold on. Verse 4. Verse 4, he says, again, I saw that for all the toil and every skillful work, a man is envied by his neighbor. So you can work and have skillful work, but still you're envied by your neighbor. He says, this is also vanity and it's grasping for the wind. I love that phrase, grasping for the wind. What Solomon is saying is he's saying all of this work that you're doing is like you can feel the wind blow and you can see the effects of it, and it's like you reaching out and grabbing the wind, and when you open your hand, you have nothing. And that's what Solomon is saying all of this is like. It's literally like grasping for the wind. Verse 5, the fool folds his hands and consumes his own flesh. So he's saying, the fool folds his hands and consumes his own flesh. The person who does nothing, he sits there and folds his hands and his own flesh is eaten up. He eventually dies. Then he goes on in verse 6, he says, better a handful with quietness than both hands full together with toil and grasping for the wind. So he finds a balance here again in work, in the work of someone's hands. Verse 7 through 12, let's read. Then I returned and I saw vanity under the sun. There is one alone without companion. He has neither son nor brother, yet there is no end to all his labors. Nor is his eye satisfied with riches. But he never asks, for whom do I toil and deprive myself of good? This also is vanity and grave misfortune. Solomon is saying there's someone who gives themselves to work, and they work, and they work, and they work. And they don't stop and look to say, who am I working for? And eventually they get enough. But they work, and they work, and they work. And he's saying this is vanity. Not only is it vanity, it's a grave misfortune. I think some translations say it's a great evil. Verse 9, he goes on to say, two are better than one, because they have a good reward for their labor. For if they fall, one will lift up his companion, but woe to him who is alone when he falls, for he has no one to help him up. Again, if two lie down together, they'll keep warm. But how can one keep warm alone? Though one may be overpowered by another, two can withstand him. A threefold cord is not quickly broken. So Solomon, right here, he's saying, okay, you got people who work, they labor, they toil, but they get enough, and it's like they continue to work. So what I hear Solomon saying here, he's building up companionship. Solomon is building up, though earlier he said it's good to enjoy the fruit of your labors. What Solomon is saying here, he's saying, well, if you don't have anyone to share it with, if you don't have anyone to give it to, then all is vanity. For the most part, it's useless. As we move on to chapter 5, chapter 5 was a very interesting chapter. And as I read it, and as you read chapter 5, it's not something that you hear preached on often, but it's a really sobering chapter, especially the first part of it. In chapter 5, Solomon is talking about going before God. He's talking about the way that you go before God. And so often, even in churches sometimes, it's taught that because people are like, well, I don't know how to pray. How do I go before God? And I've even been taught, years ago it was taught, well, you talk to God like you talk to your friend. And while I do believe that's true, sometimes there's a reverence for God that we don't have. And I believe that Solomon touches on that here. Look at verse 1. He says, walk prudently when you go to the house of God, and draw near to hear rather than to give the sacrifice of fools. For they don't know that they do evil. Solomon is saying when you go in to talk to God and you're just blabbering, Solomon is saying you don't realize that you're doing evil. Verse 2, do not be rash with your mouth, and let not your heart utter anything hastily before God. For God is in heaven and you're on earth. Therefore, let your words be few. For a dream comes through much activity, and a fool's voice is known by his many words. When you make a vow to God, do not delay to pay it, for he has no pleasure in fools. Pay what you have vowed. Better not to vow than to vow and not pay. Verse 6, do not let your mouth cause your flesh to sin, nor say before the messenger of God that it was an error. Oh God, my bad. Why should God be angry at your excuse and destroy the work of your hands? For in the multitude of dreams and many words, there is also vanity. And he sums that up with those last three words. He says, but fear God. As we move on to let's move to chapter 10. Chapter 10, Solomon talks about the evil of loving wealth. I keep saying chapter, but verse 10. Verse 10. Verse 10, media. I'm sorry. I'm getting my chapters and verses confused. But verse 10, we're still in Ecclesiastes chapter 5. Verse 10, he says, he who loves silver will not be satisfied with silver, nor he who loves abundance with increase. This also is vanity. When goods increase, they who eat them, they increase who eat them. And this is what I was talking about earlier. So what profit have the owners except to see them with their eyes? What he says is that the one who loves silver, when he gets silver, all he wants is more silver. He says that when the goods increase, when you get some people who prepare for Armageddon, and they hoard a lot of food. They hoard canned goods and MREs and stuff that they can that can last for a few years. But the imagery that I see here in verse 11, Solomon says, when the goods increase, they increase who eat them. And that's a law, that's a principle that you cannot overcome. Solomon hoarded so much. He had so much. And this is the man who had everything that he wanted. But his advice is, when the goods increase, when you get so much of what it is that you want, that just means that there are more people to consume what you have. Verse 12, the sleep of a laboring man is sweet, whether he eats little or much, but the abundance of the rich will not permit him to sleep. This is a very revealing scripture that you've heard that old saying that with more money comes more problems. And that's what Solomon is saying here. Verse 12, he says, the abundance of the rich will not allow them to sleep. The rich, once they've done all their toiling that they had to do to get what they want, they can't sleep because they're worried about somebody taking it. I've got so much. I need to make sure that nobody takes it. And I need to get an alarm system, and I need to get a guard dog, and I need to pay somebody in order to watch it, and the one that they're paying ends up taking what they have. So they can't sleep. Verse 13, there is a severe evil which I have seen under the sun. Riches kept for their owners to his hurt, but those riches perish through misfortune. When he begets a son, there is nothing in his hand. As he came from his mother's womb, naked shall he return, to go as he came. And he shall take nothing from his labor, which he may carry away in his land. So what he's saying is, the same way you came out is the same way that you go in. Obviously, there's nothing you can take to heaven. But listen to verse 16. He says, this also is a severe evil. Just exactly as he came, so shall he go. And what profit has he who labored for the wind? All his days he also eats in darkness, and he has much sorrow and sickness and anger. Here is what I have seen. It is good and fitting for one to eat and drink, and to enjoy the good of all his labor in which he toils under the sun all the days of his life, which God gives him. For this is his heritage. If you notice, this is the third time that you've heard Solomon say that in 5 chapters. Now, as we move on to chapter 6, it seems that he goes backwards a little bit. It seems that he's found some resolve in working and in enjoying what it is that God has given. But in verse 6, he says, verse 1, he says, there is an evil which I've seen under the sun, and it's common among men. A man to whom God has given riches and wealth and honor, so that he lacks nothing for himself of all his desires, yet God does not give him the power to eat of it, but a foreigner consumes it. This is vanity, and it is an evil affliction. And in this one verse, I honestly believe that though Solomon says he's seen it under the sun, I think Solomon is really talking about his own experiences. Because he says in verse 2, a man to whom God has given riches, wealth, and honor. And we know that God gave Solomon riches, wealth, and honor. But Solomon got to the point that he could not, I really believe he could not enjoy it. Verse 3, he says, if a man begets 100 children and lives many years, so that the days of his years are many, but his soul is not satisfied with goodness, or indeed he has no burial, I say that a stillborn child is better than he. A child who was born dead is better than the one who has fathered 100 children, but he has no one to bury him. Verse 4, for it comes in vanity and departs in darkness, and its name is covered with darkness. Let's skip to verse 7. Verse 7, it says, all the labor of a man is for his mouth, and yet the soul is not satisfied. For what more has the wise man than the fool? What does the poor man have who knows how to walk before the living? Better is the sight of the eyes than the wandering of the desire. This also is vanity and grasping for the wind. Okay, now as time is against us, I want to, let's briefly touch on chapter 7. Because in chapter 7, he seems to kind of come out of his funk. And he begins to give pragmatic wisdom. He begins to give some type of practical wisdom. In verse 7, he says, a good name is better than precious ointment, and the day of death than the day of one's birth. Better to go in the house of mourning than to go into the house of feasting, for that is the end of all men, and the living will take it to heart. Now, when you hear a verse like this, Solomon is saying the day of death is better than one's birth. And while that sounds morbid, if you actually think about it, the day of a person's death is better than the day that they were born. But you have no control of where you are when you're born. When you're born into circumstances, you're born to a certain family, you're born in a certain geographical location. But at the time of your death, you've considered everything that you've done in your life. Everything that you've done in life, you've had the opportunity to learn. You've had the opportunity to experience things. You've had the opportunity to not only change your life, but you've had the opportunity to change so many different people's lives. And that's why I think that this is so wise. These sayings that he's saying here in chapter 7 are so wise, and that I know that he experienced them. Verse 2, better to go in the house of mourning than in the house of feasting, for that is the end of all men. When a person dies, that's the end, and the living take it to heart. When you're at a wedding, when you see someone coming together, it's a time for celebration, and you really want to celebrate that. You do. You want to celebrate that. But when it comes to the time of death, that really causes people to think. Because you can't deny what's in front of you. You can't deny the fact that every life comes to an end. And usually when people sit at a funeral, they're considering their own path. They're considering, okay, this is what happened to him. This is what happened to her. How is it that I can make my life better? And that's why I believe that the day of a person's death, Solomon says, it's better than the day of mourning. Verse 5, it's better to hear the rebuke of the wise than for a man to hear the songs of fools. For like a crackling of thorns under a pot, so is the laughter of fools. This also is vanity. And in chapter 7, he goes on, and he gives a lot of pragmatic wisdom. So in chapter 8, I know I'm moving really fast, and I apologize for that, but there's 4 more chapters we got to get to before the questions and answers. So chapter 8, Solomon, while he speaks on certain qualities of good leaders, he starts by saying, let's read verse 2. I say, keep the king's commandment for the sake of your oath to God. Don't be hasty to go from his presence. Do not take your stand for an evil thing, for he does whatever pleases him. That's not where I wanted to go. Verse 10, I'm sorry. It's in verse 10. Verse 10 says, then I saw the wicked buried, who had come and gone from the place of holiness, and they were forgotten, in the city where they had so done. This also is vanity. Because the sentence against an evil work is not executed speedily, therefore the heart of the sons of men is fully set on them to do evil. Solomon is saying, basically, people do evil and get away with it, or seemingly get away with it. The sentence is not executed speedily. Therefore, the hearts of the sons of men is fully set on them to do evil. Hey, I tried this, nothing happened, so why not do it again? Though a sinner does evil 100 times, and his days are prolonged, yet I surely know that it will be well with those who fear God, who fear before him. But it will not be well with the wicked, nor will he prolong his days, which are as a shadow, because he does not fear before the Lord. Verse 14, there's a vanity which occurs on the earth, that there are just men to whom it happens according to the work of the wicked. So he's saying there are just men who seemingly get the reward of the wicked. Again, in verse 14, he says, there are wicked men to whom it happens according to the work of the righteous. I said that this also is vanity. So I commended enjoyment, because a man has nothing better under the sun than to eat, drink, and be merry, for this will remain with him in his labors all the days of his life, which God gives him under the sun. Yet again, Solomon is saying, eat, drink, be merry, enjoy the work of your life under the sun, because this is what God has given you. Chapter 9. In chapter 9, basically what Solomon's saying, he's saying time and chance is going to happen to all of us. For I considered all this in my heart, so that I could declare it all, that the righteous and the wise and their works are in the hand of God. People know neither love nor hatred by anything they see before them. All things come alike to all. One event happens to the righteous and the wicked, to the good, the clean, and the unclean, to him who sacrifices and to him who does not sacrifice. As is the good, so is the sinner. He who takes an oath, as he who fears an oath. This is an evil that's done under the sun, that one thing happens to them all. Truly, the heart of the sons of men are full of evil. Madness is in their hearts while they live, and after that they go to the dead. But for him who is joined to all the living, there is hope. For a living dog is better than a dead lion. So what he's saying here is that even though the same thing happens while you're alive, you have the opportunity. You have the opportunity to make some things different. You have the opportunity to make your life better. All right, chapter 10. I've got to get to chapter 10, 11, and 12, so we've got 10 minutes left. So if you got questions about verse 9, just hold it. I know I didn't talk much about verse 9. I have so many notes up here, and it just seems like that clock is in fast forward mode. Okay, so I'm going to skip that, come back to that. Chapter 10, Solomon contrasts wisdom and foolishness. Where does it start? Dead flies putrefy the perfumer's ointment and cause it to give off a foul odor. So does a little folly to one respected for wisdom and honor. Solomon is saying here, I think one translation says that the flies, how does it put it? The fly, something about the perfumer's ointment. But basically, the perfumer's ointment is when a perfumer makes an ointment, it's something that's almost priceless. It's something that when you put a perfume together, when I think they call them the apothecary, when they put them together, it's something that they put together, and it has a price and it has a scent that you can't really put a price on. But all it takes is for one fly to get into that ointment, and it completely ruins it. So as Solomon is contrasting wisdom and foolishness here, he makes the example of one fly getting into the ointment. And he says that so does a little folly to one respected for wisdom and honor. A wise man's heart is at his right hand, but a fool's heart is at his left hand. Even when a fool walks along the way, he lacks wisdom, and he shows everyone that he's a fool. If the spirit of the ruler rises against you, do not leave your post, for conciliation pacifies great offenses. And the point that I wanted to make here is what Solomon says is basically it takes, and you can attest to this, it takes longer to build a building than it does to tear it down. It takes longer for you to build your name up than it does for you to tear it down. Unfortunately, you can have someone in the community who is respected, a spiritual leader. You can have someone who for years you've looked up to as a person who's taken themselves and they say, I'm going to hold myself to this standard. And it literally takes you years to get to that point. Because people by nature don't trust. We're not trusting individuals. I don't trust you for me to put my hope in you enough up until the point that I know you. And even those who have gotten to the point that they've been very well respected, all it takes is one scandal. It takes one scandal for you to hear something, and then the proof comes out, and all of a sudden you look at that person differently. You're like, wow. And you forget all of the things that they did in the past in order to gain that level of respect, and it takes this one thing. One brick you can pull out of a structure, and the entire thing comes falling down. And when Solomon contrasts wisdom and folly here, I believe that that's what he's saying. He's saying you can be a wise person, you can elevate yourself, and you can do basically all things right, but all it takes is just a little folly. And that little folly is enough to destroy everything that you have done in the past. Chapter 11. So at this point, Solomon has done everything. Solomon has experienced everything. He's gone to different lands. Solomon has literally traveled the known earth. Solomon has gone from land to land, and he's talking to kings, and he's talking to paupers. He's experienced everything. Solomon had women, and he had singers. He had everything. So at this point, in chapter 11, Solomon, he's done everything he could do, and now he becomes optimistic. Now he's gotten to the end of the movie. You remember at the beginning where Solomon was like, vanity of vanities. He's like, everything is vanity. Now here in chapter 11, and we're going to try to read most of this because I think there's a lot in it. Chapter 11 at verse 1, he says, cast your bread upon the waters, for you will find it after many days. Give a serving to 7 and also to 8, for you do not know what evil will be on the earth. This is a man who's experienced it. If the clouds are full of rain, they empty themselves on the earth. And if a tree falls to the south or the north, in the place where the tree falls, there it shall be. He who observes the wind will not sow, and he who regards the clouds will not reap. Verse 5, as you do not know what is the way of the wind, or how the bones grow in the womb of her who is with child, so you do not know the works of God who makes everything. What he's saying here, right now he's saying, okay, I've done all of these works. I've tried everything to find the purpose of life under the sun. Now you notice that he's completely pointing to God. He's saying, under the sun, you're not going to find the answer. If you want to find the answer, you've got to take a step out there. You've got to take a step of faith. You've got to put your trust in God. Verse 6, in the morning, sow your seed, and in the evening, don't withhold your hand, because you don't know which one's going to prosper, either this or that, or whether both alike will be good. Truly, the light is sweet, and it is pleasant for the eyes to behold the sun. But if a man lives many years and rejoices in them all, yet let him remember the days of darkness, for there will be many. All that is coming is vanity. So though he's pointing to God, though he's actually pointing to the fact that we need to step out and trust God, he says, even if you live many years, rejoice in all of those years, but understand that the days of darkness, there will be many days of darkness. And everything that's coming is going to be basically empty. It's going to be useless, everything that's coming on the earth. Verse 9, rejoice, O young man, in your youth. So now he's pointing to the youth. Now, who knows how many years Solomon had experienced this? This wasn't a 2-week or even a 1-year journey. Solomon literally, like I said earlier, he traveled all over the known world. So Solomon has gotten to the point to where he's older, a lot older. He says, rejoice, O young man, in your youth, and let your heart cheer you in the days of your youth. Walk in the ways of your heart and in the sight of your eyes. Experience life. Experience it in your youth. But know that for all these, God will bring you into judgment. So he's saying experience life in your youth, enjoy life in your youth, but understand that the things that you do in trying to find the purpose of life, God is going to bring you to judgment for those things. Therefore, remove sorrows from your heart. Put away evil from your flesh, for childhood and youth are empty or are vanity. And verse 12 is the conclusion. Verse 12, Solomon says, remember now your Creator. He continues on in the days of your youth, before the difficult days come. So he's saying that remember him in your youth. The time that you want to know God is in your youth, because as you get older, the difficult days are going to come. And the years draw near when you say, I have no pleasure in them. I don't have pleasure in the years. While the sun and the light, the moon and the stars are not darkened, and the clouds do not return after the sun. So he's saying this is a time where the sun and the light are gone. The light at night, the moons and the stars, they become dark. Verse 3, in the day when the keepers of the house tremble and the strong men bow down. And I believe this is a reference to the keepers of the house trembling is a reference to the hands that tremble, and the strong men bow down. He's talking about when the legs get weak and when the grinders cease because they're few. Your teeth, the grinders cease because basically your teeth are falling out. And those who look through the windows grow dim, the eyes grow dim. When the doors are shut in the street and the sound of grinding is low, or the sound of eating is low. When one rises up at the sound of a bird. I'm sure a lot of people in here can attest to that. When you hear the birds rise, when you hear the birds sing. When you're younger, I don't think young people know what birds sound like because they can sleep through a train wreck. But as you get older, I've noticed that as I get older, I'm waking up a lot earlier. Even on my off days, I wake up and I can hear the birds. It really is a good thing. Verse 5. Also, they are afraid of height, and terrors in the way. When the almond tree blossoms, speaking of the hair growing white, and the grasshopper is a burden, something so light becomes a burden, and desires fail. For man goes to his eternal home, and the mourners go about in the streets. Verse 6, he says, remember your Creator before the silver cord is loosed, or the golden bowl is broken, or the pitcher shatters at the fountain, or the wheel broken at the well. We understand that the pitcher holds the water. We understand that the wheel at a cistern is what brings the water up. Then the dust will return to the earth as it was, and the spirit will return to God who gave it. So he's speaking of death here. And he's saying, enjoy God and really know God in the days of your youth. And moreover, verse 9, and moreover, because the preacher was wise, he still taught the people knowledge. Yes, he pondered and sought out and set in order many proverbs. The preacher sought to find acceptable words, and what was written was upright, words of truth. The words of the wise are like goads, and the words of scholars are like well-driven nails given by one shepherd. And further, my son, be admonished by these. So he's saying, take the warning. Of many books there is no end. You can write books forever. And much study is wearisome to the flesh. You can study and study and study and philosophize, but that becomes weary to the flesh. So in the end, Solomon, who's experienced everything that he's ever wanted, anything that his heart wanted, he says, in the end, let us hear the conclusion of the whole matter. He says, fear God and keep his commandments, for this is man's all, or this is the duty of man. It's the whole duty of man. God will bring every work into judgment, including every secret thing, whether good or evil. When Solomon gets to the end of this, and Solomon is wearied from much traveling, from experiencing many relationships and doing this and doing that, Solomon says, this is the whole duty of man. What I expect from you, don't go through it because I've been through it. Serve God in your youth. Get to know God in your youth. This is the whole duty of man. Fear God. Keep his commandments because you're going to be judged. That was 12 chapters in about 53 minutes. And I know that there are questions, so we're going to go ahead and pray and go home. Father, please help us. Okay, so I know that was a lot. So does anybody from here on have any questions? No, seriously. Are there any questions or any comments, anything that someone wants to bring to light from the overview of the book of Ecclesiastes? Either I did or... We'll see. Did you say 7 or 11? Okay. Okay, so, and anyone else can chime in on this if you so choose. But when I read this, excuse me, and I didn't look up the Hebrew translations of this, but when I read it, I see in context, this is the point to where Solomon begins to point to God. He's talking about days of darkness versus the days where you can see the light. He says, truly the light is sweet, and it is pleasant for the eyes to behold the sun. Verse 8 goes on to say, but if a man lives many years and rejoices in them, yet let him remember the days of darkness. So I do believe that there is an allude to him looking to God. I do believe there is an allude to him looking to Holy Spirit, and even in the Old Testament, to looking to Jesus. But I really can't go much deeper than that. I think that this is a contrast from where he was to where he is now pointing. He realizes from everything that he did, now he's pointing upward to God. Not yet. Y'all don't know there's some history here. She's got like a whole composition book full of questions. Oh, I thought you still had the mic. Any other questions? Any comments? Well, I appreciate that. There is so much. I believe that there is so much in the Bible, in 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 so many books of the Bible, and it's difficult to take a bird's eye view because I know that there's so many points that we could zone in on. So for anybody whose favorite scripture I missed, I apologize. But I do appreciate that because it is difficult, especially when you've been threatened for 3 weeks with questions.
Well, even your intro, how you brought out that, vanity, vanity. And when I read it, that's the same take I took. Like, wow, this is depressing. But how at the end, it's like he took us on his journey. We could see from his experience, in life. But at the end, like he said, the whole duty is to fear God. And in considering the beginning to the end is, even though all these things are vanity, we know there are many vanities in life. But at the end, if you live life through God, fearing God, you can enjoy these vanities in the proper perspective, in what they were given. You have a house. A house is, we enjoy it, we live in it, but it's just a house. We know that we enjoy life through God in everything. Even going to work, you can enjoy work in God.
Right.
So how you brought out everything and shined the light on the beginning and how you just concluded it, and it was beautiful.
I appreciate that, and I'm glad you said that. One point that I did want to make sure that I solidified is, like you said, though Solomon says, he says so often vanity, vanity, vanity of vanities, it's not necessarily a bad thing, because you could walk away from this thinking, okay, well, all the things that I do and the work that I do and the things that I enjoy, God is saying that they're vanity. Understand the reason he said vanity is because they are empty. They're not capable of answering his question. God gives us all things richly to enjoy. So it's not that God gives us things and we're not to enjoy them. It's just that these things are not capable of answering the ultimate question that Solomon was trying to figure out. What's the purpose of life? So, and when I read the book of Ecclesiastes, I can hear, it's almost like a parent. I've experienced it, obviously not in as great proportion as Solomon did, but I've experienced knowing something. And many of us have had that experience when you know something and one of your children, you try to impart that wisdom to them, and they like, you old, you don't know what you're talking about. It's a whole new world. And you're like, nothing is new. I know the path that you're going. And I can kind of hear that, and I believe that that's responsible for some of Solomon's quote-unquote depression. Now, he experienced a lot, but as he's penning this, it's almost like I can hear him. He's like, just listen to me. Trust me, it's not worth it. That thing that you think that you want, I've heard so many young people say, and I won't say so many, I've heard quite a few young people say, people who have, and it saddens me, people who have walked the path, people who have kept themselves pure up until the point that they get married. And I've heard a few people say, you know what, I kind of wish that I went the other way. I kind of wish that I did all the bad things so that, once I get married, then it's not. And I look at that, and it's an anguish that I have because I know the end, because I've seen it. I've seen the fact that when you look and you covet the things that are totally ungodly, I know what those people who have done it, I know what they've went through. Those people know what they went through, and it's kind of an anguish that you have for your children and those who are coming up behind you. And you're like, if you could just listen to me, trust me, I've done it, or if I've not done it, I've seen it. I've seen what it does, and that's kind of what I hear in the book of Ecclesiastes. So thank you for bringing that point up. I wanted to make sure that I closed that out, tied up any loose ends. Any other questions or comments? None? All right. Well, we thank you all for your time. And as we go, I would like to declare a blessing. Father, I thank you. I thank you, Lord. The entrance of your word truly brings light. Father, I pray that as we've heard your word, that we'll meditate on your word. I pray for understanding. I pray that nothing will be taken, Lord. Father, may the enemy, may the evil one not steal an ounce of what you have deposited today. Father, I pray that you will give understanding. I pray that you will help us, Father, to take the word and to apply it to ourselves and to become better for it, Lord. Father, I pray that in the night hours, Lord, that you will commune with us, Lord. I pray that as we meditate, Father, that this word will bring forth good fruit for your glory, Father. I thank you, Father, for your great love and your protection. I pray that you will go before us, Lord, as you always have and as you always do. Father, be our rear guard. Lord, go before us. Father, I pray that the armor of God, that daily we will take that armor, Lord, and every attack of the enemy will fail. I declare this blessing over every household represented here and those who are watching. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen. 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 Well, you all have a good evening.